"Clear your desk before lunch," he said, on a got-em all-hands Zoom. That's how I found out I was fired, live in 1080p, mid-sentence, in front of 140 blinking boxes. Some faces turned off immediately. A few just froze like stunned deer. And there, dead center on my second monitor, was Tripp, the CEO's overcaffeinated son, grinning like he'd just potty-trained himself. "Thanks for your service, Nancy. We're moving toward a more agile model," he said, making the air quotes like a toddler who just learned sarcasm. "We need people who adapt." I was literally holding the Q4 audit packet in my hand. 7 tabs open, compliance portal running in the background, and this little nepotistic muppet decided that was the moment to make his power play. Mid-rollout, end of fiscal, live. I didn't say a word. Just closed my folder, placed my badge on the desk beside my keyboard, and nodded once. "Understood. Let me pause here for 1 second real quick, because if you're hearing this and thinking what the hell happens next, go ahead and tap that subscribe button and drop a like. It keeps this channel alive and pisses off every Tripp in every office across America. All right, back to the bloodbath. What you need to understand is this: I wasn't middle management. I was the spine, regulatory vertebrae of that $150 million contract they paraded around like it fell out of the sky. For 6 years, I sat in silence, drafted the audit flows, tied vendor attestation to renewal protocols, and designed the sign-off cadence that kept federal eyes happy and funding moving. But to Tripp, I was just dated. That's what he called me once in a Slack DM he accidentally sent to me instead of his brand culture group chat. "Nancy's good with the old systems, but she's kinda dated. Not great optics for the new flex culture." I replied with a smiley face and archived the message. So, on this bright and shiny Friday, Mr. Brand Culture decided to assert dominance. Cut the dead weight. Show the troops that he could swing the axe without asking daddy. Never mind that I was the designated rep, legally named in the contract. Never mind that my biometric login was the only one with federal compliance clearance. Never mind that every single vendor payout went through a signature protocol I authored, tied to a clause he clearly never read. Tripp had his moment, and I gave it to him. After the call ended, I stood up slowly, like I was waking from anesthesia. My desk was already clean. I don't keep knickknacks. Just a mug that says read the fine print and a folder marked Exit Contingency 14A. I pulled it out, flipped to the first page, and snapped a picture. Then another, just in case. 3 contracts, each over 40 pages, all with my name in bold ink next to words like attesting officer, designated representative, and contractual signatory. Legal terms are boring, but you know what's not boring? Part that says, any change to the designated rep must be initiated by client compliance officer and must undergo 90-day vetting by external regulatory review, which means they couldn't replace me without triggering a client-led audit. Oops. I walked out without saying goodbye. Nobody made eye contact in the hallway, not because they didn't care, but because they did. This wasn't the kind of place where people got fired in public. Hell, he had employees who'd embezzled travel reimbursements who got better send-offs than I did. But I wasn't mad. I wasn't sad either. I was calculating. In my car, I connected to my hotspot, opened my email, and typed 7 words to our client's general counsel. Change of representation protocol triggered by employer. Hit send. Closed my laptop. Put on my sunglasses. I drove to the one place Tripp would never think to look. The co-working space where I'd already registered my LLC, Nancy Consulting. Because Tripp hadn't just fired me. He'd fired the only person who could legally keep the contract alive. I didn't say goodbye to a soul. Just walked down the hallway like a ghost who knew where all the skeletons were buried, because, spoiler alert, I put them there. Badge in one hand, folder in the other. Took the elevator down past HR's floor without stopping. Not worth the oxygen. Let them think what they want, that I was humiliated, that I'd go quietly lick my wounds with a glass of wine and a LinkedIn post about new beginnings, that I'd come crawling back once the severance check cleared. Tripp probably imagined me sobbing into a throw pillow while his culture-forward reign began. Bless his delusions. I walked right out to the parking lot, got in my Camry, drove 4 blocks to the strip mall co-working suite with a flickering Wi-Fi included. Sign. It smelled like off-brand Febreze and expired ambition. I loved it. It had a microwave, a locked door, and best of all, no Tripp. I slid the folder onto the desk and opened it. Inside were 3 contracts I'd printed years ago, back when the company still cared about things like continuity and federal compliance. Pages 14, 19, 22 were already tabbed with neon post-its. 1 in yellow, 2 in red. All 3 had my name on them like some kind of bureaucratic tattoo. The important one, the contract we called the crown jewel internally, had a clause nobody paid attention to. Clause 14A. Designated representative, Nancy Lawson. Verified, vetted, and irreplaceable unless the client initiated the change. Not HR, not Tripp, not even Daddy CEO with his golf course NDA buddies. This wasn't a technicality. This was federal regulation. You mess it up, you don't just lose a client, you trigger audits, freeze funds, and risk blacklisting from federal vendors. That contract didn't say a compliance officer. It said me, with my license number, my signature, and my biometric hash code. I logged into the secure drive I'd mirrored 2 weeks ago, just in case, downloaded the latest backup of the compliance chain, the audit trails, and the authentication logs. Saved them to an encrypted drive I kept hidden in a box of chamomile tea at the back of my pantry. My mom always said, if it's boring, nobody steals it. Next, I sent exactly 1 email. No drama, no emojis, just subject, change of representation, immediate flag to senior counsel, client name redacted body. Due to internal restructuring, my position was terminated today. Clause 14A may now be affected. Please confirm whether change of representation protocol has been initiated on your end. Signed it, attached nothing. Let them ask. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling while the hum of an ancient vending machine groaned in the hallway. They had no idea what they'd done. Tripp thought he fired some crusty compliance dinosaur, holding up his Instagram-friendly revolution. In the basement of that contract, buried in the part no one read, I was the keystone holding the whole thing upright. The role wasn't transferable without a vetting period, background checks, federal clearance, and most critically, client-side initiation. That's why I didn't go to HR. That's why I didn't argue or cry or ask for an exit interview. They were irrelevant. They didn't fire me. They just yanked the only support beam out of a very tall, very expensive tower and whistled as they walked away. And by the time sunset painted the clouds that weird burnt orange over the Arby's next door, my phone buzzed once. Not from my old employer, not from Tripp, from the client's general counsel. 1 line, can we confirm you're unavailable for Q4 at a station? I didn't answer yet. Let the silence marinate. Let them all realize that nothing was signed. Nothing was processed. The quarterly renewal was legally dangling from a thread with my name etched into it. I zipped the folder shut, locked it in the drawer, turned off the lights. Not hiding, not hoping, just waiting. Saturday night, the email landed like a brick in the company's inbox. Subject, urgent Q4 at a station pending from redacted senior counsel, client to, exec compliance at company. Com CC, board chair, legal, CFO body. Per contractual terms, Q4 sign-off is due. Please confirm availability of the designated representative as outlined in Clause 14A. If unavailable, protocol for client-led substitution must be initiated immediately. Awaiting confirmation. It was polite, professional, and lethal. By 6:42 p.m., legal had already replied with a non-answer. We're assessing availability and will confirm shortly. Meanwhile, Tripp was kicking back in a rooftop bar drinking canned tequila and texting the exec group chat, a shrug emoji followed by, "Isn't this what backup reps are for? Lol lol." Across town, in legal's dimly lit home office, Janet, from compliance counsel, was pulling her hair into a bun with 1 hand and scrolling frantically through contract archives with the other. She'd been there during the negotiation. She remembered Clause 14A vaguely, some line about representative authority. But as she reread it now, her stomach did a somersault. Clause 14A wasn't vague, it was surgical. The designated representative, DR, as named, shall retain sole signatory power for all quarterly compliance attestations and renewal certifications. Substitution of DR is permitted only under documented client-initiated transfer, with a 90-day regulatory vetting period. Emergency override permissible only upon federal intervention or DR incapacitation, medically certified. Translation: unless Nancy was dead or in a coma, she was still in charge. By 7:10 p.m., Janet had looped in the board chair, the CEO, Tripp's dad, and 2 outside attorneys. The email subject line was now in all caps: Clause 14A noncompliance risk. And Tripp, still on the rooftop, still sipping his ego through a paper straw, finally checked his phone at 7:38, squinting at the wall of red notifications like they were a pop quiz. "Can't we just call her back in for a signature or something?" he typed. Janet didn't reply, but another lawyer did. Clause 14 names her explicitly. "We can't use anyone else without violating the contract. Any interim signer invalidates the attestation." Another message followed from the client. "Failure to provide an authorized attestation by close of business Monday will freeze all remaining funds pending audit." Freeze all funds. Let me put this in perspective for you. That $150 million contract, it wasn't just the company's biggest client. It was the company. That money funded entire departments, IT, infrastructure, even the marketing clown squad that printed those culture-first mousebeds Tripp liked to hand out like breath mints. And right now, the whole machine was waiting on one thing: a signature. My signature. Janet dug deeper. She opened the compliance portal logs. Every file, every flow, every regulation mapping for the past 4 years traced back to a user ID that began with N. Lawson. The permissions were biometric locked, two-factor authorized, tied to my professional license ID. They couldn't even open the attestation form without triggering an authorization ping to my now deactivated company email. The kill switch they pulled on Friday, it locked them out of their own system. By 8:15 p.m., the board was officially notified. Emergency session scheduled for Sunday. Janet's final message before logging off read: she didn't just write the protocol, she was the protocol. And yet Tripp, his infinite vinegar-soaked arrogance, posted one last message before going silent. "Tell the client we're onboarding someone new. We'll fast-track it." It was like watching a toddler confidently stick a fork into a toaster. The reply from the client's legal team was immediate. 3 words: "Not how this works." And somewhere, in a cozy co-working space lit by a single IKEA lamp, I was eating takeout lo mein straight from the box, watching a live feed of a house slowly burning. A house I'd wired with kerosene and labeled modernization. They hadn't called yet, but they would. The moment Tripp realized Clause 14 wasn't a footnote, it was a fuse. Sunday morning cracked open with the soft sound of panic. No alarms, no sirens, just 1,000 tiny fractures webbing through the company's foundation like stress cracks in cheap porcelain. At 8:02 a.m., Eagle tried to log into the compliance portal. No dice. The system responded with a bland but brutal message: unauthorized access. Primary biometric ID required. Primary ID, Nancy Lawson. At 8:07, IT tried to override it. They dug through old JIRA tickets and security audit trails, only to discover that Nancy hadn't just used the default role, she'd built a custom one. A special access tier woven through 5 levels of encryption, tied to a hardware token and a biometric hash. Her face, her fingerprint, her two-factor key. Gone. Procurement was next. A mid-level analyst, Derek, poor bastard, tried to greenlight a vendor payout for some infrastructure licensing. The screen blinked red, awaiting quarterly compliance at a station. Without it, the system defaulted to pending. Pending meant frozen. Frozen meant vendors weren't getting paid. By 9:15, finance was in full tilt. Multiple payouts stalled. Renewal processing frozen. Internal ticketing flagged manual override required. Manual override meant escalation. Escalation meant explaining to the CFO why half the company's external dependencies were bottlenecked under a single missing checkbox, which only Nancy could check. And here's the part where the slow dread turned surgical. A junior legal associate, bright-eyed, 2 years out of law school, still believed in logic, looked up from the contract and asked the one question nobody wanted to answer. Did anyone actually read the clause she wrote? Janet, from legal, didn't even look up. We skimmed it. At the time, we were told it was boilerplate, just regulatory filler. The associate nodded, then flipped her laptop around so everyone could see the contract clause, blown up in 16-point font and highlighted in poison yellow. Read: substitution of the designated representative requires written client approval and completion of a 90-day vetting process. Any lapse in continuous designation shall suspend contractual obligations until resolution. No retroactive sign-offs permitted. No interim authorization accepted. Translation: you can't fake it. You can't backdate it. Can't replace her with Chad from procurement just because he once downloaded a PDF titled Compliance for Dummies. At 10:30, someone finally called Nancy. It rang once, then went to voicemail. No callback, they emailed. Nothing. They Slack messaged her, which was especially tragic because they'd already revoked her account. Still, some poor soul typed, "Hey, just wondering if you could help us out real quick." This was a case of a misplaced Excel sheet instead of a $150 million slow-motion train wreck. Meanwhile, Nancy sat barefoot on the worn couch in her co-working space, sipping cold coffee and reading. She'd already seen the call come in, ignored it. She knew exactly where they were in the panic spiral. She could have drawn the diagram. Stage 1, denial, it's fine, we'll figure it out. Stage 2, confusion, wait, what the hell did she actually build in there? Stage 3, blame, who let her have this much control? Stage 4, bargaining, can we just call her and ask nicely? She was waiting for Stage 5, desperation. That's when things would get interesting. At 11:42 a.m., her inbox chimed. Not from the company, from the client. Subject, designation, status, body. Nancy, understood you're no longer with company. Happy to discuss options for attestation moving forward. Please advise best time for a quick call. Bingo. Nancy closed the laptop gently and stood up to stretch. The sun was leaking in through the blinds, hitting the dust in long, tired streaks. She still hadn't showered. Didn't need to. Across the city, a group of overpaid executives were realizing that all their synergy decks and reorg meetings couldn't unsign a contract. And across state lines, a client with $150 million on the line was realizing they didn't need the company, they just needed her. She didn't need to answer the phone, because the terms had already been written. In plain, irreversible ink, and Nancy Lawson was no longer a former employee. She was the bottleneck, and soon she'd be the solution. On her terms. Monday, 9 a.m. sharp, the boardroom lights flicked on. Every executive who still thought this was a solvable misunderstanding got their soul dropkicked by a 5-second dial tone. The client had joined the call. Not a manager, not an account rep, their legal counsel and procurement head. And they weren't here for small talk. Unless attestation is completed by 5 p.m., the client's counsel said without a hint of warmth, "We'll consider the contract suspended and begin procurement review with alternative vendors." Was the verbal equivalent of a shotgun on the conference table. Tripp, now looking slightly less like a startup Jesus and more like a man who just learned the stove was on, cleared his throat and went straight for denial mode. Okay, let's not overreact. We're promoting someone internally. Shouldn't be an issue to get the sign-off by end of day. He said it like he was offering free shipping. Legal didn't even let him finish. Janet looked like she hadn't slept since the Stone Age, turned toward him like she'd been waiting years to deliver this particular brick to the temple. "You can't," she said flatly. Clause 14a, 90-day vetting window for any new designated rep, must be client-initiated. None of that happened. You skipped it. Tripp blinked. But that clause, it's just continuity boilerplate, right? Like a formality? No, Janet said, the calm of a woman who's drafted her resignation letter 3 times in the last 12 hours. It's a lockout clause. And Nancy wrote it. We all signed off on it because no one read past page 19. A pause. Then the CFO, Rita, sharp as a tack and twice as mean, leaned forward slowly like a warden in an interrogation room. You mean to tell me, she said, that the only person who could authorize $150 million in active client funds is the one you humiliated on a goddamn Zoom call in front of 100 people? Silence. Tripp opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Well, we can't just bring her back in. That would look bad, he said, as if optics were going to protect him from breach of contract litigation. The client didn't flinch. We don't care what you do internally. We want attestation. If Nancy Lawson isn't signing it by close of business, initiate formal non-performance protocols. That includes withholding current and future payments, including Q4. The phrase withholding Q4 hit harder than a layoff memo on Christmas Eve. Janet flipped her binder open and pushed a sheet forward. To be clear, she said, now speaking directly to the board chair, Nancy wasn't just a compliance officer. She designed the reporting chain, configured the multi-factor security infrastructure, built the audit-proof workflow. She is literally named in every single vendor transaction approval log since 2019. She was the continuity plan, added the junior associate, who now looked like she aged 10 years in 2 days. She didn't leave gaps. She built them. Tripp leaned back, his face starting to collapse in on itself like a dying star. Why didn't anyone tell me this? Janet didn't bother answering, just stared at him with the dead eyes of someone who once believed in corporate loyalty and now shops for bunker property on weekends. And somewhere across town, Nancy was watering a spider plant next to her tiny window, listening to the birds and watching her inbox. Not rushing, not sweating, not even gloating, because this was never about revenge. It was about architecture, structure, control. The contract hadn't just made her important, it made her indispensable. Intentionally, quietly, legally, the system didn't just rely on her, it recognized her. She was the fingerprint on every failsafe, the name on every redundancy plan, the human firewall no one could overwrite without a months-long process and client consent. And she knew they were on that call, knew they were unraveling. She still hadn't answered their emails, because they weren't ready yet. They still thought this was fixable. Hadn't realized the truth. She didn't lock them out. They fired the only person with the keys. At exactly 11:27 a.m., the company got their answer, not from a groveling return request, not from some weepy "I missed the team" email. It came as a PDF, one page. Letterhead from a newly registered LLC, Nancy Lawson Consulting, Limited. The message in the body of the email was short. Surgical. Board chair's assistant subject. Q4 at a station following recent events. I am no longer an employee of company. As such, I will not be signing any compliance documents without legal contract review. Should your team wish to resolve the current client bottleneck, Nancy Lawson Consulting, Limited, is available for subcontract under the following terms. Sincerely, Nancy Lawson. No emojis. No hope you're well. Just a digital signature and one simple attachment. Proposal N. Lawson LLC PDF inside. Flat rate. $60,000/month. 6-month minimum, direct reporting line to client-side compliance. No NDA restricting future consulting engagements. No office hours, no Zooms, sign-off authority remains exclusive to Nancy Lawson. Payment due on net 10 somewhere in legal. A paralegal coughed. Someone else swore under their breath. It was elegant, it was brutal, and it was their only option. Back in the boardroom, no one spoke for a full 30 seconds after the email hit. Even Tripp sat still, eyes wide, jaw slack, like a man who just realized he'd been playing poker with his hand facing the wrong way. She's charging us $60,000 a month to do the job we fired her from, he finally said. No, Janet corrected, still reading the PDF. He's charging us to clean up your mess and keep the client from nuking our entire fiscal quarter. CFO Rita leaned in, pinching the bridge of her nose. And she'll have direct contact with the client? Yes, said legal. Which means if she ever wants to walk, she doesn't need us to do it. The silence returned, heavier this time. The kind of silence where you can hear your career coughing blood in a corner. Can we negotiate? Tripp asked, weakly. Doesn't need to negotiate, Rita snapped. She's not an employee, she's a vendor now, she owns the lane. Janet looked around the room. Technically, she designed it. The board chair finally spoke. First time all day, what happens if we don't accept? The client liaison had already answered that an hour earlier. We'll terminate the contract and withhold Q4 funding pending audit investigation. Translation. They'd be lucky to keep their reputations, let alone the money. Had no leverage, no time, no fallback. Every hour that passed was another inch of rope tightening around their quarterly forecast, another vendor invoice unpaid, another team starved of funding. At 12:03 p.m., legal responded to Nancy. Proposal acknowledged. Will expedite review. Contract incoming. Nancy, who had spent the morning drinking coffee on her back porch watching a squirrel eat half of a granola bar, opened the reply. She didn't smile. He didn't gloat. She opened her client VPN, logged in, and began preparing the attestation packet she'd already had ready since Saturday. Not because she needed them, but because they needed her. And now they'd pay for it, on her terms, with interest. At 12:17 p.m., she received a second email. Subject, client internal thread, confidential forwarded from, procurement head message, honestly, we should have been contracting with her directly from the beginning. I let a company stand between us and the person actually doing the work. Nancy read it once, then saved it. The board thought they were buying back stability. What they didn't realize was they'd just signed over control. The call came at 3:42 p.m., unknown number, but Nancy knew exactly who it was before the first ring finished. She let it go to voicemail, twice. The third time she picked up. Hello, a pause, then a low, gravel-dragged voice. Nancy, it's Paul. The real CEO, Tripp's dad. The man who used to give her tight nods in hallways and call her rock solid in performance reviews before vanishing behind a parade of VPs, consultants, and his brand rebooting, management theory TikTok son. He sounded older. Not the kind of older that comes with age, the kind that comes with realizing you've been sleeping on top of a landmine for 6 years. He sighed. I just wanted to say, this isn't how it was supposed to go. We thought you were just ops. You know, keeping the gears turning, supporting back end. Nancy didn't respond right away. She looked out the window of her co-working space, watched a plastic bag tumble across the parking lot like a lost idea. Then she spoke. That was your mistake, she said evenly. I wasn't ops. I was infrastructure. Another long silence. You could hear his shame trying to form into words but never quite making it. Signing the subcontract, he said finally. Full rate, no edits. She didn't thank him. She wasn't the one who needed grace. I'll forward the signature to client side once it hits my inbox, she said. Then I'll process the queue for attestation. Okay, one more beat. He tried to salvage something. You know, you always did good work. Nancy allowed herself half a smile. Yes, I did. They hung up. 14 minutes later, the signed agreement pinged into her inbox. She uploaded it to the client portal with a brief note. Subcontract signed. Attestation authority revalidated. File attached. By 4:12 p.m., the funds were unfrozen. By 4:25 p.m., the client's renewal confirmation landed in the company's inbox, flagged high priority. By 4:40 p.m., finance unlocked vendor payments. And by 5:00 p.m., the quarterly numbers were salvaged, just in time to avoid setting off internal panic alarms that would have triggered a cascade of investor questions. They'd survived. Barely. All because the woman they dismissed like a spare paperclip had quietly laid the foundation they were now forced to rent back at premium. Nancy leaned back in her chair, stretching her legs. The hum of the air conditioner above her buzzed like faint applause. She hadn't planned for revenge. Not really. But she had prepared for exit. He had built a system designed to function only as long as it was treated with respect. And when they pulled the wrong piece, the whole structure sagged until they had to come crawling back. Her re-entry wasn't a surrender. It was an offer, not a reunion, a contract. She wasn't rebuilding bridges. She was selling the lumber. And this time, no one was getting her badge. No more hierarchy, no more chains of command. Just a name, a rate, a digital signature. Nancy Lawson, designated rep, retained, not employed. Tuesday morning, the client forwarded her an email thread they hadn't meant to share, or maybe they had. The subject line was innocent enough. Subject, back-channel discussion Nancy consulting, but inside, it was a quiet confession. We should have been contracting with her directly from the start. Honestly, why were we dealing with middlemen who didn't understand the protocol, she wrote. Another replied, her attestation packet is tighter than anything we've received in 5 years. No red lines, no revisions, clean. Then, if she's open, I'd prefer to loop her into renewal strategy directly next quarter. Nancy read it twice, not out of disbelief, but because the symmetry was so perfect it almost felt fictional. 6 days ago, she was ejected like a coffee-stained policy binder. Now she was the power behind the curtain, and the curtain itself. No longer a cog in someone else's machine. Now she was the machine. She stared at her screen for a long moment. The corners of her mouth twitched. Not a smile exactly. Something colder, sharper, more enduring. At 9:17 a.m., she replied, happy to discuss renewal strategies. Please forward your calendar availability. Loop in procurement so we can streamline approvals. It was the kind of email only a few people in corporate life ever get to send. Clean, controlled, and dripping with invisible triumph. While she typed, she noticed another notification. Internal chatter. Someone from her old company had accidentally tagged her old email address, which now auto-forwarded to her consulting inbox. The message had gone out to senior leadership. Subject, org chart adjustment, strategic ops text. Effective immediately. Last name will transition to an exploratory projects role with a focus on innovation pathways and R&D potential. Translation. He was being moved out of the spotlight and into a padded room of irrelevance. A punishment dressed as a promotion. A sandbox for failures with no budget and no meetings that mattered. Exploratory projects. The adult version of sending a kid to play in the garage with duct tape and a broken flashlight. There was no announcement. Oh, thanks for leadership. Just a quiet burying under the weight of his own misfire. Nancy didn't gloat. She did open a new note titled Client Expansion Plan 2025, because now the rules had shifted. She wasn't working for the client anymore. She was working with them. The procurement team had already added her to their approved vendor list. The legal department had marked her LLC as preferred external consultant. And internally, conversation had begun shifting from can we get her to sign off to why weren't we letting her lead this in the first place? Nancy had become the blueprint, not an employee, not a risk, an asset with leverage, distance, and options. She stood up, rolled her shoulders, and poured a fresh cup of coffee, the kind that tastes better when it's earned. Behind her, a post-it was still stuck to the wall, the one she'd scribbled months ago during a sleepless night, designed backwards. Exit first. Buy it. Now, so would everyone else. 3 weeks later, the revised contract went live. No fanfare, no all-hands call, just a clean, time-stamped upload to the client portal under Q1 amendments executed. Buried midway through on page 18 was the new language, no red lines, no qualifiers. Just truth in plain font. Section 14A, designated representative designated rep, N. Lawson, retained via Nancy Consulting LLC. Representation shall remain valid indefinitely, unless terminated by written request from Client Compliance Counsel. Not company discretion, not HR approval, not pending internal alignment. Client request only. Nancy's name was no longer a footnote. It was the fixture. The role she once held as an invisible backbone had been reborn as a sovereign function, upstream of every policy, every audit, every dollar. No logins to legacy portals, no badged access to fluorescent lit floors. No 8 a.m. quick syncs about synergy from people who spelled compliance with a Y. Just her laptop, her terms, her name etched directly into the foundation, not penciled on a whiteboard in someone else's war room. The company had stopped pretending they controlled her, because they never had. Across the city, in the now infamous exploratory projects wing, Tripp sat in a glass box trying to reinvent digital receipts for office snacks. No direct reports, no client exposure, just Slack messages that went unanswered and weekly check-ins titled Creative Reflection. Nobody said it aloud, but everyone knew. He'd been politely boxed in indefinitely. Meanwhile, at the small co-working space with its chipped coffee table and buzzing fluorescent bulb, Nancy tacked up a small metal plaque outside her suite. Read, Nancy Lawson Consulting, Limited. Compliance isn't control, it's design. Clients started calling directly. Some were referrals, some were quietly disillusioned employees from her old company, slipping her DMs asking if she'd ever consider taking on full vendor management. She told them what she told everyone now: I don't do supervision. I build systems. She no longer responded to requests from the company unless routed through her contract liaison. She no longer answered urgent emails without a retainer. She didn't have to threaten anyone, didn't expose secrets, didn't file suit. She simply walked out of the house she'd built when the roof started leaking, and then sold it back to them by the square foot. That's the part no one understood until it was too late. She hadn't fought for her job. She designed a system so tight, so elegant, that walking away became the final lock. The moment she left, foundation creaked, the walls sagged, and they all scrambled to hammer up support beams using buzzwords and duct tape. But Nancy, she didn't need walls. She built bridges, guarded gates, owned keys. She didn't climb back up the ladder they'd kicked her off. She hauled it away. And when the next company asked how she did it, how she turned collapse into leverage and silence into a six-figure stream, she just smiled and said, "Don't start with where you work. Start with how you'll leave." Because in the end, it wasn't revenge. It was architecture. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.